Good day, everybody. Kevin Hogan, author of The Psychology of Persuasion, How to Persuade Others to Your Way of Thinking, celebrating its 18th birthday, 18 years old. It's an adult, finally, after all those years. Author of 21 other books that have been translated into 41 languages. Today, hypnotic storytelling for narrative transportation. And today, you find out one of the most important aspects of a story that almost everybody, probably including you and even sometimes me, that we leave out of the story, and that is, what is at stake in this story? Why are we listening to that person? Here's the deal. 96, 7, 8% of the time, the person's not listening to you tell your story because it's really boring. Why? Because there are no stakes in the story. And I don't mean like a steak that you have at a restaurant. I'm talking about like what's at stake. And like, for example, in the movie Star Wars, Star Wars, is Luke's job to save the planet, or is it to save Princess Leia? Well, of course, it's to save Princess Leia. And by extension, he'll save millions of other lives, right? But his real drive, his real stakes are what's in his heart, to save Princess Leia. Or in the movie Die Hard, Bruce Willis, one of my favorite movies, everybody knows this. Bruce is going to see, John McClane, Detective John McClane, is a police officer out in New York, and he's going to visit his wife, Holly Gennaro, her maiden name, at the Nakatomi Plaza building. See, I really do know this story, huh? And he's going out there, and he's going to try to reconcile their relationship. It's Christmas time, right? And so he ends up going to the building where she works, and he finds her, and he's irritable, and she's irritable, but he really wants to make this thing work out. There's a building full of people. There's probably 50 or 100 people at this Christmas party, of which Holly's one of those people. And it turns out that terrorists come, take over the building, and they threaten to kill and do start killing all the people in the building. Now, one of those people is his wife, Holly. Holly is the person that he's there for. All of those other people matter. But here's the fact. The fact is that no story is valuable because there's 50 million people starving over there, or 2 billion people go to bed every single night on planet Earth without enough food in their stomach, and they wake up starving. Nobody cares about that. I mean, yes, it's a sad thing. You care, I care. But the fact is that people don't. But when you show a person a picture of one thing, when you can get in your mind Die Hard, John McClane, the New York police officer, has gone to the building, the Nakatomi Plaza, and his wife Holly is down there. When he realizes that her life is at stake, the one thing that's really held him in this building, that's caused him to absolutely take care of business and make sure that he saves her at all cost, that's what's at stake, is her life. Everything else matters, but it's all secondary to the key component. And then in the movie It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart, another one of my favorite movies. Everybody knows that too. It's a Wonderful Life, and we always think of George Bailey as the guy who's there to save the town. He has the building and loan, and he helps people out with getting loans at a very reasonable price so they don't have to do business with Old Man Potter. But what is George really fighting in this movie? What's really at stake? Well, he's got depression. He's experiencing very difficult times. These are all fights that he's having, fights against himself. That's not what's at stake, though. What's at stake is his integrity, okay? His integrity. And it's, if he will go to Old Man Potter and take a job that would be the equivalent of millions of dollars a year in today's money, he loses his integrity. He's put into this final position where he's broke. His family is broke. He's got a wife and kids, but he doesn't budge. He refuses to budge. And by refusing to budge, he proves his integrity. All the rest of the story is important and valuable, and there are other things at stake in the story, but this is the really key point. The concept here is to neglect the big scope of the problem and to focus on the little scope of the problem. Here is an experience I had 10 years ago. I was in Poland, and I was working with the health ministry. I had been hired over to help with the HIV Aids program there, and because I asked for too much money, they made us go down to this terrible little convent place. It wasn't terrible, but I remember it that way, in the southwestern corner of Poland. And we actually held our conference in a chapel at a convent in the southwest corner of Poland. And I used to think the city was called Naklasau, but I think I've pronounced that wrong. So anyway, so we were down there, and we actually gave our conference in that chapel But what was really amazing that day is I was there for HIV Aids Prevention. On the road down from Warsaw, Warszawa, to the city of Naklozow, what I think is Naklozow, about 2.5, 3 hours, it was the drive. And once we were out of Warsaw, about halfway down, about an hour and a half out of the city and going toward the middle of nowhere, you started to see little 11 and 12-year-old girls holding up signs. And the signs were all, of course, written in Polish, but I had my friend Andre sitting next to me, and he translated. And basically he said that this little 11, 12-year-old girl who hadn't even hit puberty yet is sitting here holding a sign, and the sign said, sex with condom, 25 zlotys, that's $6 in those days. Without condom, 50 zlotys, which was about $12 in those days. $12 for sex with this little 11, 12-year-old girl. And as I'm sitting here asking Andre what's going on here, he's telling me the story of what's been going on in Poland and how this is a real big problem with the Russian Mafia and all that kind of stuff. And then about 4 miles later, there's another little girl, 11, 12 years old, standing on the side of the road with a sign almost identical to the one the previous one had. And then about 5, 7 miles further, there was another one. And I said, how many of these kids are out here? And he said, there's hundreds of them on the roads. There really weren't too many highways in Poland at that time. But he said there are hundreds of them out here, and they're brought to just for the Russian Mafia to make money. Now, if I talk about the scope and saying children are being harmed by the Russian Mafia, there's hundreds and hundreds of kids that are suffering basically the equivalent of all these immoral acts and horrible things at the hands of people who are taking advantage of them for $6 or $12, as if it would be okay if it was $100, and it wouldn't, of course, right? But no, that's not the story. The story, the real story, is where you say one child's story. And that second child, or the third, or whichever, reminded me of my daughter, who at the time, by the way, was 14 when I'm back home. And it just hit me, and I told Andre, I got a 14-year-old kid at home, and she's older than these kids, and it would just freak me out if. And that was the story of that weekend, right? That I really did understand, walking into that chapel on that morning, precisely what the story was. I neglected the scope of the problem. I brought it to one specific child, because there I was in a convent, at a place that they teach not to use condoms to their parishioners, right? You know, this is where the word spreads from. And so I had to make a good argument without making the debate about who's right and wrong. I had to discuss this on a level that was emotionally significant to them and to me. My daughter, who's like their daughters, right? The people here at the health ministry that are here at the chapel. By communicating that information, and that I could understand and identify the plight of this girl, where I could look at each woman in the audience and get that resonance and that connection, and allow that experience to sink in, so they understood that the scope of this problem was one person, that child right there. Sure, there's hundreds of them, but as you picture that one girl in your mind, that one little girl, now you're willing to take action. So when you're sitting there, no matter whether you have great news to tell somebody or terrible news, the fact is you don't want to try to save the whole building or save the whole world or save one person or make 1,000 people's lives better. You're here to make one person's life better. Perhaps it's your listener, perhaps it's the person in your audience, but every time you tell a story, you're not going to say, yes, I've done millions of things with millions of people. All of this is no good in your story. It's the story of one person and how it resonates and identifies with that person, and you do that by neglecting the largest scope of the problem and focusing in on the individual experience, positive or negative, and it makes for an absolutely amazing story experience. Okay, guys, I will see you here next time.